Hi, I'm Doug Carroll for InsidersGuideToFinance.com with a short little presentation on reverse repurchase agreements. So, what's a reverse repo? Well, as we'll see, the structure of a reverse repo, at least superficially, is almost exactly the same as for a repurchase agreement. In fact, the structure of the transactions are so similar, and given the naming convention that we'll talk about later, many introductory level books mistakenly describe them as one person's repo being the other party's reverse. But let's look at the structure of the transactions before we dig into that little bit of terminology in some detail. So what's a reverse repurchase agreement? Well, like a repo, it's a transaction between two counterparties. And while again the counterparties as in a repo can be drawn from a wide range of different financial market participants, let's make this a specific example. Let's say on one side of the transaction we have a broker-dealer, on the other side of the transaction a hedge fund. So in a reverse repo, the hedge fund in this case will have in mind wanting to get its hands on specific securities. They'll find a repo and reverse dealer, and upon reaching agreement, the hedge fund will reverse in the securities in return for which they'll hand over some money. And as in a repo, at the same time that initial transaction is agreed to, a second order ticket will be written up showing the hedge fund returning those securities and getting back money with interest. Now, just below that, I'll reprise the diagram of a repo. And I'm not going to talk about repos in detail here, but check out our other video on repos if you need the context for that. You'll note the picture for the two transactions look almost exactly the same. On one side of each transaction is a broker-dealer with securities. On the other side of the two transactions, there's some institution that's going to hand over money when they get securities. Now, the naming convention that I cited before was that, well, let me expand on it in a little bit of detail. When the party holding securities needing to get their hands on money initiates the transaction, it's called a repurchase agreement. When the party holding money that wants to obtain, that is, reverse in specific securities, it's referred to as a reverse repurchase agreement. Now, the distinction might not be obvious yet in the explanation that I've given so far, but let me embellish on that by a little bit by expanding the explanation of both transactions. In fact, let's consider transactions of a longer duration than overnight, which is by far the most common length of repos. Something like 90+% of repos are overnight transactions. But let's say in our repurchase agreement transaction, it was a term repo, say a 30-day term repo. So when the insurance company gets the treasury notes in this example as collateral on the loan it's made to the broker-dealer, let's say over that 30-day term, the treasury security actually paid a coupon. Who's actually earning the interest on the treasury note over the course of that 30-day term repo? Well, the U.S. Treasury is going to recognize the insurance company or its agent as the owner of record, so they're going to be the one that receives the coupon payment from the U.S. Treasury. But the insurance company or its agent will immediately have to kick those funds back to the broker-dealer, because again, even though it's called a sale and repurchase, it is really a collateralized loan. And the fact that the broker-dealer is earning the interest on the Treasury securities over the term of the transaction clearly highlights that fact. Well, back to our reverse now. Why would the hedge fund want to reverse in securities that it's not going to earn any interest on? And note, by the way, you wouldn't do a reverse to earn interest on your funds because the interest rate on reverses is typically below the interest rate on repos. So if you're looking to make some interest, you're going to invest your money in a repurchase agreement. In fact, for securities in high demand, on special as they say, the interest rate on reverses is sometimes negative. So the hedge fund wouldn't be engaging in the reverse to make interest on its money. They'd do a repo if they wanted to do that. So again, back to my question, why does the hedge fund want to reverse on securities they're not going to earn interest on? Well, there's a variety of possible reasons, but one common one might be that they need to obtain securities to deliver on a short sale. Now, while there's a much more formal definition of a short sale, a working definition is a sale of securities not owned. And while for people not familiar with short sales, it somehow might sound fraudulent or manipulative to sell something you don't own, but there's actually really good reasons for doing things like that. The hedge fund might be shorting treasury securities to hedge some other long exposure they have, or maybe they're speculating on a decline in price. Now, those are just a couple of reasons why a hedge fund might have wanted to do a short sale, and there's a variety of others. But what we need to consider are the motives of the counterparty in the short sale. Because the buyer in the transaction, the party on the other side of the hedge fund short sale, is not buying to accommodate the hedge fund's desire to go short. They're buying because they want to possess the securities. They want to own the securities long. They've written an uncovered call that got exercised, and they need to obtain the securities to deliver on the exercise of that call. So whenever one does a short sale, they're going to have to cover it. That means they'll have to obtain the securities they sold that they didn't own so they can deliver those securities to the buyer in the transaction. Now, there is a securities loan market. Large investing institutions will have a securities loan program where they'll lend out securities out of their fixed income portfolios as a way of generating additional interest income. But in those transactions, the borrower of the security typically does have to pay interest. Note, on many reverse repos, the hedge fund in our example will actually make a little bit of interest. So in effect, reverse repurchase agreements are cheaper ways of obtaining securities to deliver on short sales than engaging in some sort of securities borrowing. So note the naming convention as well as the reversal in the dynamics of the factors driving the two transactions. It's known as a repo when the party holding securities needs to obtain money. And remember, we described that as a collateralized loan, a loan of money collateralized by securities. So, what's going on with the reverse? Well, remember, it's a reverse repo if the transaction is initiated by a party holding funds that wants to get their hands on specific securities. The transaction will result in in this case, hedge fund, reversing in the securities and exchanging money to obtain those securities. So what's the substance? Well, if a repo is a loan of money collateralized by securities, a reverse repo is just the opposite. It's a loan of securities collateralized by money. I hope you enjoyed this video. You can go to our YouTube channel or Facebook page to see other videos on a range of investment-related topics. Or you can go to the website, insidersguidetofinance.com. At our website, in addition to the free video shorts, there are a series of modestly priced, in-depth training videos with running times of approximately 1 hour each that go into a number of subjects in greater detail. The website and Facebook page also contain information about open enrollment programs I will be presenting over the next few months and my recently released book, The Insider's Guide to Fixed Income Securities and Markets.